Are we all set? Okay. Thank you all for coming. My name is Stefan Olsson. I am the director of the think tank Fri Värld, Stockholm Free World Forum in English. And I'm just would like to say thank you all for coming to listen to this fascinating lecture. I heard it yesterday, so I can assure you that it is fascinating. And you're lucky that you decided to come, I can assure you this. And our guest tonight is Pauline Dixon from Newcastle University, expert in schools in developing countries. So I'll turn over the word to you directly.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stefan. And thank you very much for coming out on this very cold evening. It's a lovely select audience, so it's like speaking in my own living room, so I feel very much at home. I'm going to start off by showing you a video of some of the photographs that I've taken over the last 13 years because I've been working with low-cost private schools around the world in developing countries for 13 years now, and I've been taking lots of photographs. So we'll just start off with some of the images that I've taken over the last few years. As I said, it's a great privilege to be here, my first time in Sweden, and it's been wonderful to have been invited here by the Stockholm Free World Forum. I've had a wonderful 2 or 3 days, went to university and talked to some wonderful magazine people, and it's a great pleasure to be here to talk to you about my passion. It's not my work, it's not what I do for a living, well, it is what I do for a living, but it's become my way of life, and I can't even imagine what it would be like without doing what I do. So it's wonderful for me to be able to share it with you. I took this picture a few years ago, and this is in Hyderabad in India, in Andhra Pradesh, in southern India. And I took it because it explained to me or showed me everything that I felt in a slum area. This is a slum area, but what I saw was vibrancy. I saw competition. I saw people doing things for themselves. I didn't see people waiting around for aid agencies or governments to do something for them. I saw them actually getting on with things for themselves. But also next door to this stall, vegetable stall, which was brilliantly coloured, were other vegetable stalls, lots of competition going on there. But I was really happy when I took this picture home because right in the top corner is an advert. And it's an advert for a low-cost private school. And I took it because of the vegetables. I didn't take it because of the poster. But there we go. We had an advert there, Galaxy School, English medium. And that's one of the things about low-cost private schools in India. They're what's called English medium. And they teach in English, all of their subjects in English. And that's why parents really like them. So I really like to start off with this photo. But what really happened in 2003-04, at Newcastle University, we got a grant, the E.G. West Centre and myself, we got a grant from the Sir John Templeton Foundation to look to see how children were being schooled in slums and low-income areas around the world. And what we did, we selected countries that were very low income at the bottom of people's lists like UNESCO. And we started doing the research in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, India, and China. And so we wanted to see what parents in the slum areas and low-income areas of those countries. Really what we had was 3 questions that we wanted to look at. We wanted to sort of challenge the accepted wisdom, but we also wanted to find the truth. And what we wanted to do was to see if private schools serve the privileged or did they serve the poor? Because when we say private schools, we think of privileged schools. So private schools, one of the accepted wisdoms is that private schools serve the poor. Everybody else needs free government schools. So we wanted to investigate that. The next thing we wanted to look at was that everybody accepts that free government schools are the only way forward for the poor. The poor must need something for free. Last thing to look at is the quality of the schools. So if low-cost private schools did exist, what did they look like and what was their quality? So when we started going to different countries, it was a bit dispiriting at first. So this is Kibera. This is the biggest slum in East Africa. It's about the size of Central Park. And this is in Nairobi. And when we first arrived in Kenya, we talked to James Shikwati, one of the think tanks there, because he was going to help us with the research. And we said, we're going to come to Kenya and we're going to look for low-cost private schools. And he said, well, I don't know why you're coming here, because there aren't any private schools. Oh gosh, well, if that's what's happening, it's the truth. That's what we have to find. So it was a bit dispiriting at first, but you know, we kept on going. So first of all, we arrived at the country, and then we wanted to look for these low-cost private schools to see if they existed. And if they did exist, what did they actually look like? And this is actually a low-cost private school in rural Nigeria. What we had to do, we had to draw maps of the slum areas. Now we can use GPS on our phones or on our computers, but we had to draw maps. And we drew maps of the slum areas. Oh, I'm really sorry. I'm in good flow though. It's going to be rubbish from now on. That looks technical. Do I do this? I've got big ears. Does that
Now should be okay.
Is that right? What's this over my head? Oh, that's right. Oh, I'm really sorry about this. Right, okay. Can we make that tighter behind my ears? Do you think we scrundle it? Because that's fall off. Oh, you're so gentle. That's nice. Yeah, that's really good. Okay. All right. Stand up, everybody. Left and right and no, sorry. Don't encourage me. Okay, so the first thing we had to do was actually draw maps of the slum areas. And we drew maps of the slum areas because what we wanted to do was walk around them and plot when we found a school. And you can see on this map there are little dots. And every time we came to a low-cost private school, we might have put a blue dot. In a government school, we put a blue dot. And then maybe a private aided school, we put a yellow dot and so on. And every time we came to a school, we made a note of it. And then we went into the school and we did a survey and a census within that school. And what we were looking for were these low-cost private schools which can be recognised or unrecognised. Unrecognised means they don't abide by the laws and rules on paper, so they haven't gained recognition yet. The recognised schools have typically abided by those laws and rules, whether it's through a bribe or whether it's through actually abiding by them. But these schools charge perhaps $5 to $10 per month. And you can see there some of the children in Kibera. So what did we actually find? Well, I think it was actually phenomenal what we found, and it's very much seminal work. This is the data here for Hyderabad. And in 19 square miles, which is a relatively small area of 3 zones, there are 9 zones in Hyderabad. Charminar, Banglaguda and Badapura are the zones we looked at because they had the notified slum areas in them. We found 918 schools, which is a huge amount of schools. But what was interesting was that 335 of them are unrecognised schools. And these schools are not known to anyone. They weren't on any government lists. So if we add the private aided are typically government schools because they're aided by the government, but these are very much low-cost private schools. So in total with the schools, 60% of schools in the poor parts of Hyderabad city are private. So parents in slum areas and low-income areas in this part of the city are sending their children to low-cost private schools. So you might say, well, maybe these schools are small, maybe they haven't got many children in them. But of the almost, well, over 250,000 children going to those 918 schools, we have 65% of those children are going to low-cost private schools. And interestingly, I think 60,000 are going to these unrecognised schools. That schools don't appear on anybody's lists. So that means that UNESCO and people like that don't know that these children are going to school because they're not registered as going to school because they're going to an unrecognised school. We've just recently done some work in Bihar, in Patna, the poorest states in India. We were told there were 80 schools or 84 private recognized, unrecognized schools in Patna, Bihar. We found 1,224. So the government really don't know how many low-cost private schools there are. So in urban Patna, 78% of schools are private and 64% of children are attending private schools. Similar figures in Africa. So every place that we went, we found similar things. So for example, in Ghana, in Gar, where 500,000 inhabitants live on less than $1 a day, they live in poverty, we found 779 schools, 75% were private. So we're talking about 3/4 of these schools in these slum areas and low-income areas are private, and 5% of pupils in the Gar region in Ghana are going to low-cost private schools. Similar thing in Lagos State. We looked at 3 parts of Lagos State, Surrey, Kosafi and Badagry. And we found that 540 schools wandering around those areas, finding these schools, 66% were private and 75% of pupils in this area going to low-cost private schools. We've just finished a project for DFID, that's the Department for International Development, and these findings are still quite confidential, even though we're streaming online, but it's looking at really how parents choose, how poor parents can make a choice for their children. It doesn't matter whether the parents are illiterate, they really care about their children. They want the best for their kids, so they actually make brilliant choices for their children. We actually went into households. We did a household survey of 1,005 households. And in those households were 2,284 children. And we asked parents, how do you actually choose the school for your child? Because remember, there's loads of these low-cost private schools. The competition is rife. You can go down an alleyway and there might be 6 schools. So how do you actually choose? And the parents said to us the main source of information was the school visits. So they would visit 2 or 3 schools, look at the school owner, see what was going on, look at the facilities, and they would visit the school, make sure that the children were active when they went there. So the first source of information was going to the schools and visiting them. And most of them said they went to 2 or 3 schools to check. Then they said talking to friends, talking to family, and talking to networks, talking to people in their church. That would really help them to make a decision. Of course, there are 70% of these children that we went to the 1,005 households. 70% of children are going to low-cost private schools as we started to believe the data, because the data started to be very similar. And 3 main reasons why parents said they chose low-cost private schools was 1, proximity to home, 2, they believed that the teaching quality was better, and 3, there was better school quality. We've just finished doing research in post-conflict zones, Liberia, South Sudan, and Sierra Leone. And this is the data from Sierra Leone. Of the 1,006 government schools, again, wandering around the slum areas, now with our GPS, now with our phones, not drawing maps anymore, we only found that 11% of the schools were government. All the rest were private. I mean, if it's in a post-conflict zone, maybe you'd expect that, because if you think that the government maybe can't supply the schools. But only 11% were government, all the rest was somehow private. Not all private proprietors like we'd found in other countries. Some of them are privately owned but run by a small independent church or a mosque and so on. But still, in Sierra Leone, Western Area, Freetown, 89% of schools are private and 82% of children go to private school. So, our research over the 13 years has shown that private, for-profit education forms a majority of the provision for poor families in the countries that we've looked at, which is quite a phenomenal finding. But this is a really great news story because it means that official figures drastically underestimate enrolment. So, education for all to achieve. It's much easier to achieve because we have these unrecognised schools. And so children who are assumed to be out of school are actually getting a schooling. So that was our first finding. So the second assumption was that, well, they're poor, so they need free primary education. They need to go to school for free. That's the only way that the poor can access schooling. So we decided to investigate that. So what we did was we went to Kenya in 2003, and where free primary education had just been introduced. The World Bank actually gave $55 million, which was the largest grant ever given to education. And the former president, Bill Clinton, said the person he would most like to meet was the president of Kenya because he had changed so many children's lives. So we actually wondered how he had changed so many children's lives. So we went to Kibera, which was the slum that you saw at the beginning, which is the size of Central Park. And James Chikwati said there were no low-cost private schools in there, but we actually found 76. So wandering around that slum area, 76 low-cost private schools. And it's because people don't go into the slums. They assume, well, they can't, they're poor parents, they don't care about education, they can't make a choice, so there can't be any schools there. Never assume. So that became one of our mottos during the project. Never assume. So we found 76 private primary and secondary schools with 12,000 children in them. So free primary education was introduced in Kenya in 2003. So Kibera is in a dip. So we've got this slum area here with 76 private schools going on and 5 government schools catering for quite middle-class families up on the top of the hill, where no children would go from the slum area. Free primary education is introduced. The parents think, that might be a good idea. Why don't we send our children out of the slum area up to the top of Kibera into one of the free government schools? The 5 government schools on the top of Kibera increased their enrollment by 3,296. And UNESCO said it was a great success. Free primary education was a great success because 1.2 million more children were going to school who hadn't been going before. There might be a little bit of a problem here. So what we did was we went to the 76 existing schools and we said, how has your enrollment changed? What happened when free primary education was introduced? And we totaled up all of the children they said left or ran away or whatever they said to the free government schools. And we totaled it up and it was about 6,000 children had left those 76 private schools. So they lost about 90 or 80 kids when free primary education was introduced. We then said, do you know of any low-cost private schools that actually closed? So we're talking about them closing down because they couldn't survive. And they said that there were about 40 or 50 low-cost private schools that had closed down because they couldn't cater for the children anymore. And their total enrollment was about 4,600. So then, if we think, well, the government schools, 3,296 children went to the government schools, we're actually still missing free primary education. We think in Kibera implied that 7,875 kids were no longer in school. So it wasn't a quick win and it wasn't a great success. So we were very worried that in Kibera the schools would all close down and the children wouldn't have anywhere to go to school. So what we did in 2008, we went back and we did a longitudinal study. So it was a longitudinal study, and we compared the number of schools that were there in 2003, and our hypothesis was that maybe more had closed down. But actually, we found 116 private schools in Kibera in 2008. So it had increased the number of private schools and now enrolling 27,883. So there were now more low-cost private schools and there were more children going to school. Yes, the demography could have changed within Kibera, but the schools hadn't closed down, which from my point of view is probably a good news story, and I'll tell you why. So we asked the school owners, why is there no crowding out of the private schools? Because if there are free government schools, which I'll tell you in a minute, not particularly free, why did the children not run away from your schools and stay away? And this is what the school owners said, and I'll read it out. I know it's a bit but never mind, I'm practicing my English pronunciation. When the government initiated free primary education, few children ran away. And this is Kibera, by the way. This is one of the schools there. And after 6 months, they started coming back again after realizing that the standard in education in the government is very low due to high rate of enrollment, lack of teachers, congestion, and lack of sitting and learning materials. Now my school is full again. Another school owner said, I allow the following: flexible admission, age is not a determining factor, uniform is not a rule for admission, Parents participate in major issues at the school. We have a child-friendly approach. There's extra coaching for slow learners at free cost. We carry out home visits following up children in the community. And finally, the introduction of free primary education offered the enrolment of students in the school where many ran away to free government schools. After which they realised that teaching in free school was not all that good. They came back. So the school owners in Canberra believed that once the children actually got to the free primary school, first of all, it wasn't free. They had to buy a uniform. They had to buy wellies. They had to buy a lacrosse stick. They had to have a teacher teacher examination certificates. They had to buy lots of different things that actually upped the price. So the price of a government school came very close to what they were paying in their low-cost private schools. And what parents believed was that these schools are within their own community. So they're in the slum area themselves. They're set up by entrepreneurs in the communities themselves. So they know these school entrepreneurs, and the teachers are within the communities. When they went outside their own community, they felt that the teachers were from a different socio-economic background, and they didn't particularly want the children there from the slum area. When I asked one of the teachers in one of the government schools if she thought free primary education was a good idea, she said no. Nobody ever asked me. She said, I don't want these children from the slum area in my school. I don't want them here. They can't mix with my children. I put them in separate classes. They swear, they smell, they talk about what their parents do. I don't want them here. Everybody knows they should just go back to their own schools. And she was being honest. She said, I've had no help from the government to help me cater for these people, so just let them go away. So it's no wonder that then that's picked up by the parents, and because the parents said they weren't paying the fee, they felt they couldn't go and complain. And they couldn't go and complain to somebody that wasn't from their community. How can you complain to somebody who's of a much better socioeconomic class than you? So that was the reason why the parents felt they were much better off in their low-cost private schools. So parents and children disagreed with the government that the best way forward for the poor is free. They still wanted their low-cost private school, and this is a school playground here in Canberra. But not everybody agrees with the parents. This is Mary. She's an education administrator in Nigeria. We did a BBC Newsnight programme, which you can probably find online, because they were very interested in research in Nigeria. And Mary, they interviewed Mary, who was the lady from the government, and they asked her, why do parents send their children to low-cost private schools when there's a free government alternative? And she said, because parents are ignoramuses. That's what she said. She said, private schools are the good, the bad, and the very ugly. These ill-equipped, unapprovable private schools are causing a lot of damage, generations wasted. And she actually said, children come out half-baked. One, she'd never been to a private school, and two, she'd never been to Makoko, which were the schools where the private schools are. But she still had that opinion that parents were ignoramuses and they couldn't make choices, and they didn't understand the difference between paying 6 to 10% of their income as to getting it sort of free. So she wasn't quite getting there. But like good researchers, good people from universities, we thought, right, let's research this. Let's have a look. How can we look at the quality of low-cost private schools compared to government schools? So we did 3 things. First of all, we talked to parents. What did they actually think? We did a survey of input. So when we went to the schools, we saw whether they had toilets, whether they had blackboards, whether they had libraries and so on, and water, drinking water. And then we tested the children. We did a survey of achievements. First of all, talking to parents, parents believe that the schools are accountable to them if they pay for them. So as soon as you hand over that fee, they feel they can complain. If there's something not right, they feel they can take their child out of that school and go to another one. There's so much competition, they feel that paying gives accountability. And it's a bit like getting something free. If it's mouldy bread or something and you eat it and it's mouldy, you don't, well, I got it for free, I don't think I can take it back. But if you've paid 5 kroner for it and it's mouldy, you're going to take it back. So that's how the parents look at this in a slum area. And a great quote from a wonderful man from the slum area in Canberra. And if he was an Austrian economist, he couldn't have even done this quote. And he said, if you are offered free fruit and vegetables at the market, you know they will be rotten. If you want fresh produce, then you have to pay for it. And that's how he explained why he was paying for a low-cost private school for his children or his child. So what about the inputs then? Well, for example, class sizes are much smaller in the low-cost private schools, maybe 20 children for one teacher, much larger in the government schools, 20, 30, 40, 50, even 100 children. Because what some government schools do is when the teachers don't turn up, they just group all the kids together. So sometimes when you see on the television there's 100 kids in a class or something, it might be that 4 of the teachers are absent and 2 of the teachers are actually looking after those children. So the class sizes are much bigger in government schools, and also the activity of the teachers isn't as good in the government schools. This is on the Newsnight video. This teacher is actually a government school teacher, and he didn't wake up throughout the whole recording of the television programme. So you can actually enjoy him sleeping throughout the whole thing. And it was even unbelievable because the children actually stood up and went, "Welcome to you, the BBC crew," and he still was fast asleep. And when they went in, a little girl was actually teaching the class, just reading to them why he had a sleep. The nice thing is the education minister then comes on the clip of the BBC television programme, and he says, payment was a little bit haphazard for government school teachers, but Nigeria's now got it sorted out, and we have a very motivated workforce. And this poor guy, they shot back at him. It was but the BBC crew then said to us, we actually now understand what you're talking about, because we said, well, we've seen sleeping teachers, we've seen teachers that are drunk, we've seen teachers eating things during class, and they answering the telephone, and And as soon as they went to the government school, the first thing they saw was a sleeping teacher, because it's not an irregular occurrence, it's a regular occurrence, and at least he was there, So teachers are more likely to be absent in a government school, they're less likely to be teaching. But remember, they're not from the community, typically not from the communities themselves, and they might have had to have travelled for a very long way. So not only did we find the private schools were better, they had drinking water, they had toilets, they had blackboards, they had teachers that were teaching, we wanted to find out how the children were doing. So what we did, we tested 4,000 children in each country, and we've now tested 32,000 children around the world. And the reason we do our own tests, we test in maths, English, and home language, which is Hindi or Telugu or whatever, is because you can't rely on government data. So government tests could be in. And we didn't want to rely on that. We wanted to test the children themselves. Not only did we test them in the subject, but we tested them in IQ because we wanted to control for innate ability, just in case somebody said, well, the cleverer kids obviously go there, so they're going to do best. And we also gathered family background. So what sort of background did they have? What did their parents do? They have better jobs, have a television, they read the newspapers, speak English, and variables, what they would control for. So 32,000 children around the world sitting our tests. These are the raw scores, and this is just the raw score to give you an idea that in each country you can see that the yellow is the low-cost private school, and it's the average score. This is for Nigeria, that's Ghana over there. It's maths, English, religious education, maths, English and social studies. And for example, if we just look at Nigeria, because it's closer to me, for maths, this would be the average score of the average child in a low-cost recognised school. The darker purple is the average score of the average child in an unrecognised school, and the blue is the average score of the average child in a government school. And you can see on every single subject you've got that same shape. The government schools come out the worst, the unregistered come out second, and the recognised come out the best. But what we did, that's unfair to look at raw scores, so what we did, we controlled for IQ, we controlled for family background using multi-level modelling and the Heckman-Lee two-step procedure, which is just a statistical way of saying that we bring sort of children down to the same background level. And we still found that the children in low-cost private schools outperform the children in the government schools statistically significantly differently, and to the better. Other people have also done this work. The LEAPS project in Pakistan, run by Andrabi, they find that children in government schools would take 1.5 to 2.5 years to catch up to children in private schools in Pakistan, in Lahore. We found that it's not true. We found that girls go to private schools just as much as boys. In somewhere like China, there are actually more girls going to private schools because the schools are much closer to their communities. They don't have to walk for hours to get to the government school. So girls and boys, very similar numbers. And as I say, it's $5 to $10 per month to send your child to a low-cost private school, which on minimum wage, that's 6 to 10% of your minimum wage. So about 6% of a daily paid labourer's wage to send your child to a low-cost private school. And how can these schools operate? Well, they pay their teachers' salaries much less. So a private school teacher gets about a quarter of the salary of a government school teacher. Typically, a government teacher has a government recognised teaching certificate. Typically, a teacher in a private school won't have had any teacher training. But they will be a graduate, they'll be somebody from the community, and they'll have a passion for maths, or they'll have a passion for English, and they'll want to teach. They want to give something back to their communities, but they won't have a trained teacher certificate. But there's some research done by Gita Kingdon that actually shows that the typical CV that we would expect in the West, which would be somebody that has experience, somebody that has a trained teacher certificate, and somebody that's older might be the better teacher. In fact, in a developing context, it's different. It's the younger teacher, it's the one with the least experience, and it's the ones that don't have a trained teacher qualification. So what we would assume here is actually very different in this developing context. This is a picture of Makoko. This is in Nigeria. This is the slum area built on stilts on the Lagos Lagoon. And we used to travel across to the island there from Lagos into Victoria Island, and we used to think we'd really like to go in there to see if there are any schools. And the taxi driver said, "You can't go in there, it's too dangerous, and we won't let you in." But one day we said it again, "Oh, if only we could go to that slum area." And the taxi driver said, "I'm from Makoko, I'll take you in." So we ventured into this slum area. We had to pay somebody to look after the wheels in case the wheels got stolen on the car. And then we started punting down this Lagos Lagoon looking for schools. We came upon this little girl. The little girl was called Sandra, and David was brilliant with me. I had very high heels on. My bag had got lost with KLM. I had my high heels on. I was tottering around in this slum area, trying not to fall into the Lagos Lagoon, where they had pigs and other things floating around in the Lagos Lagoon. I really didn't fancy falling in. This little boy held me by the hand and said, "Oh, madam, stay with me. I'll help you." Then we came upon Sandra, and I said to Sandra, "Where do you go to school?" Because they were on holiday. And she said, Kennedy private school." I was like, "A private school? You go to a private school?" I thought, right, we're here. And I thought, Kennedy, okay, so President Kennedy. They must know American history. Okay, I said, "Kennedy private school?" She said, "Yes." So we punted a little bit more on this canoe, and the children were shouting, "Jawohl, jawohl." And I think, oh my God, a German film crew have been here before us. We're not the first people here. But actually, jawohl means white man in Igbo or whatever the language is in Nigeria. And then we came across the school, which was Ken Addy Private School, which is a little bit different from Kennedy, but it was Ken Addy Private School, started by this guy, BSc, in 1989. And he said he started it underneath a tree because he saw the children weren't to school, and he'd been in the business then. And these schools are for profit. These entrepreneurs are businessmen, and they're making a profit out of these schools. But they're also philanthropists, because they offer typically free places to students whose parents may be alcoholics or they may have died, but they also offer concessionary places. So not everybody pays full fees. So it could be the first child in the family pays a fee, the second one half price, the third one a fee, and then the fourth one might be free. Or they might do scholarships. So if a child is really well and they're bright and they want them in the school, they say, "Well, why don't you come to my school for free?" And when you say to the school owner, "Why do you do that?" they're very candid about it. They say, "Well, it helps my school. It makes my school look better. Why would I not have the brightest child and let them come to my school for free?" And it's my way of paying back. It's a little bit of philanthropy. So we saw BSc here in the slide here. We became very good friends with him. And after we'd done this research and it became quite famous, the Minister for International Development from the Department for International Development decided to visit BSE in Makoko because of our work. And this is Andrew Mitchell here. And he'd read about BSE school, Kennedy private school, and he'd heard the stories. And he actually went to visit to see actually what was going on with these low-cost private schools, which was a sort of an amazing point for our research, because everybody had denied that that schools existed, so we showed they did. Everybody denied that they were quality. We actually showed they were good quality, and now people started taking interest. It's a good thing that Andrew Mitchell has gone to see these schools, But also, I've written a book about it because I'm a little bit worried about that, because markets are working really well. And it's the fact that we've done the research, which is great, we've given these schools a voice. And every time we went to present the evidence to the governments, they actually said, oh, well, typically we won't close these schools down because they're actually doing better than we thought. So that's been the really plus side of our research. And I think it's just making people aware that poor people are able to make choices. They really care about their kids, and they really care, just as anybody else does, about their children's education, even though they could be a parent who's illiterate within the slum area. And remember, they're illiterate not because they're stupid, they're illiterate because they haven't had the chance, and they want their children to have that chance. So I wrote this book about international aid and private schools for the poor because I'm worried. And I'm a little bit worried because I don't want the market that is flourishing at the minute to be disrupted by people sending international aid money and not knowing how to spend it in the right way. We've got to think about international aid because people like George Aieti or William Easterly or Dambizo Moyo would say that Africa's begging bowl leaks. It's a bucket full of holes. So why do we keep giving more money when there's actually so many leakages? And George Aieti would say there's so many leakages, there's corruption, there's senseless civil wars, wasteful military expenditure, capital flight, and government waste pouring in more foreign aid unless it's effective and efficient makes little sense. And if we just look at some of the international aid money that's been wasted, and I was very impressed that Stefan told me yesterday that Sweden spends 1% of gross national income on international aid. I think the UK spends something like 0.6%. Jeffrey Sachs wants us to spend 0.7% to try to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. But George Aieti would point, well, look at this. Sierra Leone, $1.8 million given for peacekeeping initiatives, stolen in 2009 by officials who bought luxury consumer goods. 1.8 million. So, again, a waste. Uganda, 25 million given to fund a meeting of Commonwealth heads stolen by ministers. Kenya, 1.3 million worth of funding. And this is well known. This isn't what he's uncovered. These are figures that are quite well known. Funding for education projects were misappropriated by ministers. That's 1.3 million in Kenya. 17 million, this always gets me, it doesn't matter how many times I say it, $17 million worth of textbooks were lost through fraud, theft and destruction in Kenya. Where did those $17 million of textbooks go? 17 million. That's come out of our taxpayers' money. Where's it gone? And George said between 1970 and 2008, $854 billion were removed from Africa by illicit financial flows. So how much money goes to education at the minute? Well, as of 2011, bilateral education aid, that's government to government, accounts for $11 billion worldwide. 74% of education aid is government to government. 26% is through multilaterals such as the World Bank. But remember, education aid goes to government schools. Nobody's ever thought of giving money to low-cost private schools because it's not a new phenomenon, but we've brought this sector to life. And mainly, money goes to achieving education for all, whatever education for all means. But you've got to remember that education for all might mean just bums on seats. It's typically abolishing fees because they say that's what the poor need. They need it to be free. And an increased enrollment doesn't mean to say that the children are actually attending the school. They could just be on a list. Enrolling in a school does not necessarily mean that you go. And even if you go, if there's no teacher there, you're not actually doing anything. So we could say, oh, we've got 98% of children in schools in Nigeria, but if they're not actually learning anything, there's no quality going on there. Africa's begging bowl leaks, but so does the education begging bowl. These are just some examples of how leakages happen in education. So, for example, there's aid money spent on toilet construction in India, but there's no water to flush them. So you build a load of toilets, but there's no water. Okay, that's not a good idea. 8,000 televisions were provided to schools that don't have electricity, and then they were stolen anyway before they were ever delivered. So televisions go to schools that don't have electricity, and they get stolen before they ever get to those schools. $21 million of the Department for International Development aid money was stolen by Indian officials who spent the money on cars, and tens of thousands of dollars are allocated to government schools that don't even exist. So we have to do something about the aid money. So we know the low-cost private schools exist. We know they are better quality. So if international aid agencies now want to throw the money at the private sector because they think that might be a good idea, how should they do it? It should be, we need to limit the damage they do to the market. The market's doing well, So what could we actually do? So my book actually sets out some ideas, but first of all, use research to actually plan what you're going to do. Don't use top-down planning. Don't use government officials who think they know best for the poor. Use gold standard research to find out what's best for the poor. Ask the poor what they want. As that government school teacher said to me, nobody ever asked me. Nobody asked my opinion. So ask them what they want and what they need. And finally, improve, if you're going to improve access to the low-cost private schools, because remember, we've got the poor going to low-cost private schools, but not the very poorest. So you've got children in private schools, you've got children in government schools who are making those choices, but you've also got children who may be going to a government school who would like a different choice, but they can't afford it because that $5 or $6 a month is too much for their parents. So we could improve access for them somehow, and the quality, and we'll see a low-cost private school in action in a minute, we could think about how we can try to help the school entrepreneurs improve their quality. I believe this should be through market-led initiatives and market solutions, and we should encourage the entrepreneurs. We should not encourage dependency. At the minute, they don't depend on you. They depend on their consumer, who is the parent. They depend on the children doing well. They don't depend on you. Terrible mistake if they stick to me. So how could we improve access? Well, vouchers. That's great to be here in Sweden to hear all about your voucher scheme. But targeted vouchers. And targeted vouchers are a little bit different. You've got a universal voucher scheme, whereas a targeted voucher scheme would be targeting those very poorest, those children who actually wanted the choice, who haven't got the choice at the minute. And I've been working with Absolute Return for Kids, which is a charity in London, implementing voucher program for some of the poorest children there in Shahadra, which is a slum in East Delhi. And what we're doing is what's called a randomized controlled trial. And we're following children for 5 years to see who the vouchers actually help. Because there's no point in funding vouchers if nobody is helped by the voucher program. So that's what we're doing there. And also, so other people suggest conditional and unconditional cash transfers. So this is us doing work in Delhi. And there's 3 pictures here. What we had to do was we had to explain to parents what a voucher was. We had to explain that we were going to be doing it for 5 years. We had to make sure that they trusted us. So we set up booths. This is the booths there in the slum area. And we talked to parents and told them that they could come to the booth and they could actually enroll their child for the possibility of getting a voucher. This is a parent here with a child having a photograph taken, getting ready to apply for the voucher. And here, this is a parent with all the information that they needed to apply for the voucher, like a below poverty card, or showing us that they were enrolled in a government school at the moment or not in school at all. Because we didn't want to give vouchers to children who were already in private schools, but we wanted to help the poorest children. These are the vouchers. They're £100 a year. So that's £100 to send one child to a low-cost private school for a year, and that includes books, uniforms, meals, and fees. And we had these biometric codes put on the bottom so that it had the child's photograph on it, their information, so that parents couldn't trade in vouchers, or they couldn't be, fraud was kept to a minimum. Because obviously if fraud is, if aid is given to the top, it's much easy to be fraudulent going down, but what we wanted is to give aid to the bottom of the pyramid and then try to make that almost fraudulent proof. These are 2 of the kids on the voucher scheme. We had about 1,600 kids apply. Unfortunately, we had to divide them into 2 groups, those children who were fortunate enough to get the vouchers and children who actually were in what's called a control group. And then what we can do is we actually tested them, and this is us testing them in their homes. This is a baseline test going on. They're doing the maths test. So all 1,600 kids were visited in the homes, took the test, and what we've done is we've been following them through. We're up to the end of year 2. It's really amazing. I think our findings are really amazing, and I could never have predicted them. And what we found is that the girls are really benefiting from the voucher. So the girls were 5 or 6 when they started. They're 2 years down the line. And in 2 years, the girls who won the lottery compared to the girls who didn't win the lottery are 8 months ahead in English already in 2 years. For maths, they're 3 months ahead, which is still very good, and for Hindi they're 4 months ahead. And there's a statistically significant difference between their achievement in every single subject. So the girls on the voucher are actually powering ahead. So that's a great thing to do, voucher schemes. I think a targeted voucher scheme would be a very good thing for international aid. What we could look at is low-cost private school chains, and we could also chains of schools are very good. There's a chain in Ghana called Amiga. There's one in Kenya called New Globe Schools, which I think is now called Bridge Academy. There's Gautam schools in India. But a chain brings economies of scale. But at the minute, the individual low-cost private school owners, it's very difficult for them to actually make a chain of low-cost private schools. What we could is also improve quality by allowing them to access loans, microfinance, but allow the entrepreneurs to actually pay back with interest. Don't just give them the money, make them actually, they're businessmen. You know, if they've given money, let's not do that. They're not used to that. Make them pay back with interest so that they can build a toilet block, so they can improve their schools. And also this bribery that goes on for regulation, let's have different accreditation agencies that could come maybe from outside. So I think international aid could look at some of those things. And finally, I'm almost finished, is that teaching. Okay, so we know that low-cost private schools are doing better than the government schools. The government school teachers typically don't turn up, or they may not teach. But all isn't perfect in the low-cost private schools. They could be really helped with the sort of teaching that they do. This is some peer teaching that's going on in the Punjab. But what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you a very short video of a typical lesson for 1 minute. Goes on for 45 minutes though, but I'll just let you do 1 minute of it. So it's 1 minute of a teacher teaching an English lesson to some beautiful children in Hyderabad. Okay, so she does, from where do we get wool? We get wool from, you all said sheep in your head, because I could see that, from sheep, and sheep is spelling S-H-E-E-P. And she'll go through that on the blackboard for 45 minutes. And the reason she does that is because the state exam is fill in the blank. And they'll get, in an exam, from where do you get wool? You get wool from, they know it's sheep, spelling. They don't know what a sheep is. They don't know what wool is, because she hasn't explained it. She hasn't explained it in Hindi or Telugu. They just learn everything. We went to India a while back and was teaching Pythagoras' theorem by rote, the proof for Pythagoras' theorem, because in the exam, you just have to write it down by rote. Typically, the lessons are by rote. There's nothing wrong with that because the state exam needs you to do that, but there's a much nicer way for children to actually learn things and to actually be involved in schooling. One of the things that we've been looking at, and we're going to be looking at in Tanzania, is looking at gifted children. What we found was testing those 32,000 children around the world, there are some really clever kids in those slum areas. On those Raven Standard Progressive Matrices tests, some of the kids scored really highly. Out of 60, they were 50 and above. We're talking maybe 1% of those kids, not many, but they're there. Those gifted kids are there. And they're neglected. They're probably in a school from where do we get wool? We get wool from sheep, and they're bored. They might even drop out. And so we're actually wanting to find those kids so that they can inspire other kids. Lots of peer teaching, so children teaching other children how to read or how to do something much more inventive. So we need to do more work on that. And there's us doing a program called Jolly Phonics. So we have done some implementation of pedagogies and different testing. The children, the school owners, would you like us to help you with? You've been fantastic. We always thank the school owners or the government schools for allowing us access. We gave the children certificates and pencils, and they said we'd like help with the English curriculum because we're English medium, and so we did a phonics program. A phonics program teaches children how to read by letter sounds, like k at to cat, m at to mat. So we took a phonics program over, and it was a fantastic success. We've also started trialing different ways of teaching maths as well. What we're going to see now is a contrast of children that's very similar to the ones you saw standing there doing from at Wool. I had taught the teachers in Delhi how to do this program of phonics, and I taught that they had lesson plans and everything, and these children were doing peer teaching. So the children are sitting together and they're teaching each other from their phonics books. So I just wanted to show you a comparison. This was probably after 4 months of actually doing this program, how different the teacher can become. And she actually steps back, you don't actually see her, but she walks around the class listening to the children working together. And they look so proud of themselves. We've finished. We've done it. And what it is the children learn a story, and then they learn an action, and then they learn the sounds that go that. So I always say that E-or is a donkey, and it's double E for E and O-R for or. And so then the children can act out a whole word, and they can blend it in their head. So it's all about blending sounds together. But the kids loved it. All the kids were then involved. But this teacher had been doing teaching by rote. But just because she'd had lesson plans, just because she'd had a little bit of training, she changed the way she taught these lessons. So it's not impossible to change the way the teachers actually do their lessons. So what are the lessons for Sweden, I would say? First of all, that I'm always astounded by the data. And what I always want to say is it's nothing to do with us. It was happening, and it's just Newcastle and myself, Newcastle University, have brought this to the fore. So, how does this impact on Sweden? Well, first of all, I think what's really important is it shows that poor parents around the world are able to make choices. Just because somebody's poor or just because they haven't had an education doesn't mean to say that they can't make choices for their children. Everywhere we've been in the developing world, for-profit education works, and that stimulates innovation, competition, drives down prices. For international aid, then really you need to base it on gold standard research. Let's not have ineffective and inefficient aid anymore. Aid needs to be focused at the grassroots. Don't allow planners to take control of it, but ask the people themselves who are in the slum areas or searchers on the ground what is actually needed. Ask the poor what they want. And for Sweden, for Swedish aid, would be encourage entrepreneurship and not dependency. But what you should take away from this, even if it's just this one slide, is that these schools are something that are brilliant. They're something that really, really should be celebrated. Thousands and millions of children in developing worlds are being taught by these entrepreneurs, and they're getting an education that they wouldn't get in the free government alternative. And it's actually the miracle of the market that's making a difference to these children. But I think, if the Sweden aid agency wanted to get together, I think you have to do it right. And I think we could actually do it together. And I'd just like to say thank you so much for coming today. And it's been a great privilege to talk to such a very smiley and appreciative crowd. So thank you very much indeed.
Actually, hello? We have time for a few questions. So please raise your hands and say your name and who you are so we can get it recorded. And we start here.
Thank you very much. My name is Jared Odero. I'm from the Stockholm University, research in educational development. And it's quite interesting because quite a lot of what you've raised is my own experience. I'm from Kenya.
Oh,
I know the Kibera situation, Mathare, and most of those slums in Nairobi. First of all, it's quite interesting because when we began the free primary education program in 2003, a key element within the new government was to eradicate corruption. And we know that has never worked. So the program has not succeeded. For some of us who have had the interest for these 10 years, we know it's been one of the worst programs in terms of implementation. And it's true, most parents took their children back to private schools, whether unregistered, whether high cost, whether low cost. But it's also interesting that when you look back, you find that for the first time probably in one of the bilateral collaborations, Kenya was forced to pay back quite a handsome sum of money to Britain, to the World Bank and Sweden, all the sponsors for the program. So I think in terms of what you mentioned towards the end, if the developed world is contributing to certain programs, then accountability is very important. For some of us who are out talking about corruption, that is a sensitive matter for most of us from Africa. We believe that it's an element that must be investigated further because corruption costs lives. It reduces the quality of life required. It does not meet the programs targeted. So I think it's something that we need to talk more and more from within. Then I would also like to ask, because apart from your testing and the control groups and all the tests you did you check across, with the national output, with exams from the national levels? Because for me, it's interesting when I look back to the situation in Kibera, and some series was done about 3 years ago to check what happens within the unregistered sections of the slums. And what I saw was a bit alarming, because you'd find a cardboard separating one classroom from the other. And actually what went on was a total interruption in terms of pedagogical output. And you would question if the children within one section were really getting anything from the teacher, because the shouting was back and forth. So in terms of Nairobi, I don't know, because what I saw from India for me is more organized. But I think the situation in Kibera is pathetic. And I think too, in terms of, EFA, Education for All, and the quality behind, if we have to revisit 2015, then I think more teacher training is very important, because what goes on in the slums of Nairobi will not give us what we want. I think Education for All must also bear with the quality required. So I think there are certain areas that probably might not be within your research venue, but need to be investigated further. And some of us have taken interest in that. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. And yes, when you first go to the schools in Kibera, I think what we have to be very careful of is judging them from a Western standard. And yes, there are cardboards, and it is very difficult. But still, parents are choosing them, and at least the teachers are turning up and they're enthusiastic and so on. What I think is we didn't look at the tests from the state, and we didn't do that because we felt that they could be inflated, or there could be some corruption, or that the test scores might be wrong. So what we actually wanted to do with our tests. But yes, I think more research is always good. Different people doing research is excellent. But these schools in Kibera are providing an education to the children that they otherwise wouldn't get. And yes, it's not just about education for all, it is about quality education for all.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you very much. It was, yeah, I think so. Thank you very much. It was interesting to listen to you. My name is Ellen Kalm. I'm associate professor at Oslo University College. Happen to study with Jared as well. So I just, one thing is the teacher training that Jared was bringing up. I was also thinking about the language issue, because you underscored throughout that English is the medium of instruction, and we also know that that might be that's a problematic area, also from a research point of view. So I just want to hear you elaborate a bit about that, and also the approach for learning to read through that phonetic, instead of a more constructivist, holistic approach. Both these two issues are, Yeah. So I just want you to elaborate a bit about that. But I really endorse the presentation, and I would certainly like to look more into your findings and your research. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Yes, I mean, the schools in India are English medium. So, because that's what the parents want. Because, for example, every state has their own language. So in Andhra Pradesh, you typically learn Telugu, Urdu, Hindi, and English. And it's very difficult for the teachers to do the whole curriculum in English. So it tends to, but they do try. And yes, I do agree with you. There could be somehow better teacher training for the low-cost private schools. But the school entrepreneurs do give them training when they first start, and they do give them mentors within the schools as well, and they do try their best. The second question was, why did we do phonics? Well, we just felt that we'd seen that it worked in England. It was something the Johnson report had shown in Scotland had been a very good idea. The British government were just introducing it into primary schools. So we just did it with sort of 20 schools, and we had a control group, and it was just a massive success. The kids actually loved it. It actually, not only was it the fact that they learned by phonics, but it was the different techniques that the teachers could then use using a framework or using a lesson plan. They'd never used a lesson plan before. So not only was it the phonics, it was actually bringing the children out to the front to do a game. It was actually getting the whole class to do a game. So it was something that actually existed, that the whole kit was already there, it was ready to go, and it was something that we felt that we could write lesson plans around, that teachers who were typically teaching by rote, it wasn't going to be too difficult for them to then do a lesson every day following a rigid procedure, holding flashcards, which they don't have materials. So initially it was the idea that, okay, let's see if this works. let's see if the method works, but let's see if the teachers can grasp doing something different. And it really did work. The thing with phonics, obviously, as you know, is that it doesn't really teach vocabulary. It doesn't teach spoken English. So we did something called Genki English as well, and we tried to instigate some sort of vocabulary message. But the kids loved it. The teachers loved it. The kids were going home teaching their parents the letter sounds and the actions, and they also taught their younger brothers and sisters. So we really enjoyed it. The Bharti Foundation are now using phonics in India to help with their reading skills. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. I would also like to tell the rest of you that if you're more interested in our lectures and our work here at the Free World Forum, you're welcome to visit our homepage. You can see the address here and sign up for our newsletter. But first, thank you very much for this lecture,
Brilliant.
Pauline.
Thank you very much. Thank you.